design thinking is your human advantage that we really believe makes you irreplaceable. AI tools, like they can do complex problem solving. They can do all of these things. One of the number one things we always say at the end of the day, every AI needs your human spark. You have to be able to identify the problem you are trying to solve, the idea, the dream you're trying to build, the outcome you're trying to get to, the whatever it is that you are trying to design, build, or solve for, that has to come from you. And then your AI tool can do so much more after that.
Hello, welcome to the Big Strategy Podcast. I'm your host and fellow strategist, Jeff Hyatt. This is your go-to spot for real talk with the masterminds of business strategy. It's about sharing stories, insights, and those little nuggets of wisdom to help you unlock big growth. Let's turn the key and spring into action.
Welcome, everyone, to this special episode of the Big Strategy Podcast. As you know, we're focused on machine learning, artificial intelligence, and how it can coexist with people. And so today I brought on someone whom I feel is a leader in the AI space, and that is Sabba Quidwai. Sabba and I have been friends for a number of years. She's a design thinker with a history at Apple and has gone on to move her career and her expertise, and most importantly, her passions, into education. So we're going to talk about AI, how it relates to education, and most importantly, how you can apply it not only in your professional life, but your personal life with your family too. So Sabba, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Last time, oh my God, this reminds me of our Clubhouse days.
It does remind us of our Clubhouse days. There's not a direct line. We've both grown since then, but it was so cool to just sitting out on my deck on Clubhouse, and we would chat and run into each other all over the place. So this is really cool to be a little more IRL here. Well, as I mentioned, I teased the lead a little bit. We're talking because OpenAI released their ChatGPT 4.01 model, which some had called Strawberry, kind of the code name. But this has really been a leap in AI capabilities. And it brings us back to understanding the role of AI in our lives. And we were talking before the show about banning cell phones in schools, and it's kind of parallel to this banning AI. It's bad. And so, we want to frame that for you all, whether it's professionally or personally, as you do this at home. How can we bring AI effectively into our lives? So, Sabba, you and I both have a deep grounding in design thinking, and that's informed how you look at this. So why don't you give us a little bit of a background, your philosophy on the subject?
There are two quotes that I think really help understand what design thinking is and why this matters. And the first one is Einstein, right? When he says, if I had 60 minutes to solve a problem, I would spend 55 minutes on the problem and 5 minutes on the solution. And that is exactly what we are seeing in this new AI model. And the second one that we really lean into is Don Norman. A brilliant solution to the wrong problem is worse than no solution at all. So solve the right problem. And I think the commonality between those two quotes is the importance of spending time in the problem space that, and this is why we love design thinking, right? Because design thinking begins with empathy. It is all about what problem you're trying to solve. We all come to the table with these assumptions, whether it's about technology, whether it's about whatever topic it is you're in, we just naturally come to the table with assumptions. And those assumptions sometimes hinder our ability to see other angles. And by taking that step back and saying, okay, even though I think this is the exact idea that we really need to be doing so that everybody else does X, just being able to take a step back and assess, observe. And, sometimes it's interviewing people, sometimes it's observation, sometimes it's just noticing the unspoken, right? Allowing you to kind of gather all of those data points to really be able to identify what is the problem area we really need to zone into. And, one of the reasons we love design thinking is it's not just the method, right? It's not just how to solve a problem. It's also a mindset.
I love that you highlight the mindset aspect. And I also love that you highlight the idea of identifying the right problem. And this is, I think, what I would say is one of the criticisms of how we raise children in this country is we expand their knowledge base, but we expect them to be convergent thinkers or just take their set of knowledge and they're rewarded for how quickly they come up with the answer. And if they don't get the answer, as you say, the red pen comes out and it's marked wrong. But that is not the approach that is going to make people successful going forward. So what is that mindset? And then if you want to get into a little bit of the process of how do we need to reprogram ourselves and our children and our colleagues as we go forward and AI becomes more ubiquitous?
Well, I think it might just be really helpful to read, because I'm so obsessed with this line, but I think it would be really helpful to just read how it is they are training these AI tools, and kind of just even the person listening, what comes to mind for you as you hear this. They say, and this is the first paragraph of the second paragraph of their announcement, under how it works.
And when you say there, you mean
on OpenAI.
When you say the second half,
so
right?
we have the OpenAI announcement from yesterday. I was shocked when I read this. I mean, it wasn't surprising because we know this is the direction they're headed, but to see the language being framed this way, I just thought was very interesting. So they said, we train these models to, number one, spend more time thinking through problems before they respond, much like a person would. Most people don't. Through training, they learn to refine their thinking process. So focusing on process over product. And to be successful in that, they try different strategies and recognize their mistakes. So when I see that, one of the first things that came to my mind was when we talk about design thinking, one of the biggest things we tell people is your first try isn't your last try, right? That creative confidence that we're trying to build in people. And I think that creative confidence, like Sir Ken Robinson always said, right? Schools kill creativity. And this is why, because we train people into thinking there's one right answer, choose the box, fill in the blank, all these different things. Only one person gets to be valedictorian. All these, these very common things that we have today in society are so contradictory to how we know people learn and grow, the experiences we have, reflecting on those experiences. And so that, especially that trying strategies and learning from your mistakes, I was just oh my goodness, we're creating a more empathetic culture for machines than we do for little kids.
You bring up something very important. A lot of people listening to this podcast grew up in the era of Scantron tests, and that obviously made it easier for the teacher to grade and made the grading more transparent. But again, you couldn't kind of, fill in that blank space between the two boxes. You had to pick A or B. And the risk is that as parents or as leaders in organizations, since that's how we were raised, we push that on to the next generation, whether it's the next generation of student or the next generation of employees, that there are right or wrong. And as you talk about the design thinking mindset, one of the key pieces that I always teach is that iterative component, integrative first, bringing disparate pieces of information together. And once they're together, then iterate and experiment and learn our way forward. And still today, there are so few places where I see that being practiced.
Yeah, I mean, I always say the doing, and I'm sure you have this experience too. I mean, you showed me the little bot that you had created, right? But one of the things that I find so fascinating is that I saw firsthand, for so many years, how people struggled with design thinking. I think if you wanted to do let's make a wallet or a gift for a friend, great. They can play, they can have fun, they can do that. But the moment you ask them to take that concept that they learned and transfer that learning to the common thing we would always hear is, but I got to teach physics tomorrow. I got to teach fractions tomorrow. So the inability, and we know that's one of the most important parts of learning, right? Is your ability to transfer knowledge across different domains. And so that inability to transfer what you learned through the design thinking process to oh, okay, I'm going to do this instead for the next reading activity was just something that was I would say the biggest barrier and pain point to people scaling this process and being able to do that. And so I remember my first interaction with ChatGPT was the first lesson I ever saw about design thinking, which was taking a literary experience, this first grade class, reading a book, instead of just reading the book, making it a design thinking experience, becoming one of the characters, creating a solution, kind of designing your own elements of the story. And so I asked ChatGPT, hey, I'm a first grade teacher. We're reading this book, Catch That Rat, and I want it to be a design thinking experience. What would you do? And I was mind blown. I show in my presentations, because I still have the slide deck from 2015, which was the first time I ever learned about design thinking. I kid you not, word for word, what was in the slide deck popped up in ChatGPT. And so to me, a lot of people might be like, like, oh, well, that's cheating and this and that. Like, absolutely not. Like, we have to look at like who does what best where. So to me, the fact that that friction is removed and people can be like, oh my God, this is how I could do that. Guess what? The one thing that a lot of people know how to do is implement. And so as a teacher, now being able to see this lesson plan and design being built out for you, a piece that you might have struggled to connect the dots before is now something you can actually go out and implement, which is where your impact is going to be felt most. So to me, the fact that we're now seeing these models reach that next level tells me that we need to double down on the human skills and not compete with what these machines can do.
I was just at the AI conference in San Francisco this week, and one of the speakers made the argument that I think there was a generation where parents felt if my child was a computer science major, that was the path to, wealth or just a stable career, if you will. And their argument is that's actually what machines are very good at. Because if you think about it, that's an inherently converging exercise. And his argument was that it's actually the philosophers, the liberal arts majors, who have that curiosity, as you described it, one of the key parts of the design thinking mindset. But that ability to diverge, that comfort with ambiguity, is what's going to allow them to thrive in an era where increasingly intelligent machines are going to continually outperform people on converging exercises.
Totally. And I love that you brought up that coding one, because in their announcement, they do specifically call out that these models are great for science, math, and coding, but to the point of people who have been practicing design thinking. So I remember one of my favorite products that we had at Apple was our Everyone Can Code curriculum. And I feel like these are all the things I have on my phone because I like constantly coding these. But when you open up the Everyone Can Code curriculum, it starts by saying when you learn to code, you're not only learning the language of technology, you're learning new ways to think and bring your ideas to life. So again, like, I don't think a lot of these ideas are new. It's just that, I always say, quite honestly, we've never been forced to actually do them. I always say if ChatGPT was not here, we would still be doing essays in the classroom and just business as usual.
Yes. It's very similar to, I remember growing up, my middle school librarian said that researching on the internet is cheating. If you're not pulling the book off the shelf and hand copying the passage and citing your source, you're cheating. And in reality today, I think that person, now it's been, a number of years. I won't say how many, but it's been a number of years. But the point being is the internet was that wrecking ball, if you will, that broke down the status quo. I think people will realize that COVID, the digital transformations that brought and the need to move from on-premises to cloud was one of those wrecking ball moments. And I think AI is that next change. And the risk I think that parents and executives face is that they default to the traditional adoption curve, where the innovators get it, they play with it for a while, then the fast followers, right? And then, they hang out for a minute until enough features arrive till we cross the chasm. And then we can't go through that normal adoption cycle. This technology is already across the chasm. And what it is it's flattening the curve, because the people who aren't adopting this are getting pushed further along into, I don't want to say irrelevance, because that's the wrong word. I'm not trying to bring that out. I don't want this to be binary. But the successful executives are building themselves teams, hiring teams, bringing about teams of virtual assistants or digital assistants to help them be successful. I know this is something that you're passionate about, and I agree. You say it more articulately than I do. So let's just say I understand the value of divergent thinking. I understand the machines are very good at convergent thinking. I realize I need to shift my mindset, but I don't know where to start. Help us walk through that process.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And one of the reasons I'm so excited for the book coming out next month, one of the things that I love about it is that we have little chatbots that are embedded to literally help you take these steps as you're reading the book. Because again, we know, right? Removing friction is so important. What do you do best? What does the machine do best? And how do we get you to that end outcome faster? But one of the first things we tell people, which this is the biggest irony of AI that I've noticed, we don't have time to look at how to save time to think about what needs to change. The irony is absolutely insane. But one of the first things we encourage people to do is be more reflective about their day. And it's sort of like how we think about money, right? Let's say you want to buy a home or college or a trip or just a new pair of shoes or whatever it is that you are looking to make a purchase for. If you are not tracking your dollars and cents, you don't have a budget, you don't have a plan, you don't know what you're capable of, you don't know where things should be going. And I feel like subscriptions is always a big one for me. Like I'd say like every other month I go through my subscriptions and sometimes I feel like, wait, what? Like, why am I paying all this money for all these different things, right? But again, if you don't take a step back to look at it, you'll never know like where your money's going and what different decisions you could be making. And our time is really the same way. Like money can always be earned again, right? Time you never get back. So one of the first things we recommend is actually doing an analysis of your day. And it's all in your calendar probably, but just being able to, and we actually have a prompt we use to help people do this, but it's like inputting in your calendar and your activities from the day, and then being able to assess where are you spending the most amount of time. I was really surprised. I think Grammarly did such a great job of collecting a lot of data on this, but one of the things Grammarly shared, they did a 2024 State of Business Communication report, and they shared on average, we spend 19 hours a week on written communication. So if you think about the average person that does a 40-hour work week, half of that work week is spent on written communication. And that's everything from emails to Slack messages to reports to slide decks. I mean, everything. And 19 hours might sound really crazy. I'm not a writer. I don't spend 19 hours of my day, but you don't know that until you go back in and do that data analysis. So I always say, like, when we teach AI, we always kind of have this like challenge of like, at a minimum, you're going to look at how you save 8 hours a week in the first month, right? And so one of the ways we are able to do that is if you only look to written communication and how to optimize your written communication and the things you're doing, you could easily get that 8 hours just from that one area alone. So we haven't even touched anything else. So that's really the first step that we say is analysis of your time. Then on the flip side of that, what are the things you wish you could do that you just have no time to do, even though you know those are the things that are going to move the needle? So when we talk to our leadership teams, the unanimous sentiment is, I wish I had more time to walk the classrooms. I wish I had more time to be that instructional leader. Imagine the number one thing that your job really is there for is the number one thing you have no time to do. Right? So like, how do you clear your calendar? We call it the Clear the Calendar Challenge. How do you clear your calendar to be able to make more time for what matters most, right? By delegating out to your AI team. So that's sort of the second thing that when you look at like, okay, these are the areas I've identified, we have to then look at like, which of these can be optimized for AI today? Because just because it can't be done today doesn't mean it can't be done 6 months from now. I think this is going to be one of the things people will enjoy with this new model. Things that might not have worked for you last month, 6 months ago, may all of a sudden just take a whole new turn and give you a completely different result. So these AI models learn so much faster and do things that really surprise us. So that's a sort of like the second one. So like I've identified what tasks, I've then, kind of prioritized which ones can be optimized for AI. And then you want to track some ROI. You want to track like, okay, wow, I did that. I saved this much time and that opened the door to this. And I always say like one of the reasons that conversation, even on an individual level, is so important is the thing I don't think we talk about enough right now that's going to be our biggest challenge, at least here, I think in the United States, is being able to shift your mindset from hours spent to impact made. If I'm able to do something in 1 hour, but before maybe it took me a couple of days, what does that mean for the organization? Are you only going to pay people now 10 hours like a week or like that drop people's salaries? Like we can't do that. Why? Because I'm better at what I'm doing. I'm more efficient at what I'm doing. I've opened up my time for more impact driven work and it maybe doesn't take me as long as, traditionally we're used to. How are we going to start having that conversation? And are we just going to pile people up with more work, or are we going to be more intentional and thoughtful about what we choose to do with that time and how we use it inside of work and outside of work? So that's sort of like our baseline place where we recommend people starting.
At the Berkeley Innovation Group, we are a strategy consultancy and AI advisory firm focused on mid-market companies looking to unlock big growth. In contrast to management consultants' typical top-down, hypothesis-driven approach, Big uses a curiosity-inspired, bottom-up approach, leveraging customer insights to drive strategy co-creation. Learn more about our approach by downloading our ebook at biginnovates.com/ebook. Now, back to the show.
I appreciate you sharing that, and I totally agree. Reflecting on the framework you shared, is I read Charlie Munger's books, and he talks about how Warren Buffett spends over half of his day reading. Now, when you're a billionaire, obviously that one might think that's easier.
Or that's why you're a billionaire.
I think there's something to that. As we say, whenever we're trying to encourage a client or students when they're stuck in that reframe or ideation, take a walk, take a nap, take a shower. Why those things? Because they disconnect us from the day-to-day. They allow the subconscious in our brain to work and really take over and connect those disparate pieces of information, practice that integrative thinking, identifying the tasks we were sharing before we got online. This idea that, last night I had to review a legal document, which was at night is a dangerous thing because that risks putting me to sleep. But I said, hey, there's this new GPT, let's check it out. And so it's a very simple agreement. And I put it into ChatGPT 4 Turbo, and then I put it into ChatGPT 4.01, the new iteration of the model. And just identifying that was a task, that my first step was to go to an LLM. It was not to read it, take notes, and share my notes with it. No, just from the beginning, let's treat it as a paralegal, if you will. And it's important how we phrase the prompts to these LLM. So for example, I said to the LLM, you are my counsel. I am the CEO. Review this document and bring to me the issues that as the CEO, I need to decide on. And just giving it that role, giving it an outcome and applying some constraints gave me a very targeted review that was more like a dialogue and less like a legal review. And that optimized my time. There was a tangible ROI. I turned it around in half the time, very roughly speaking. But there is that efficiency gained. So that's an example of how I saw it professionally. How do you see this put into practice?
I feel like the one thing that at least in our world, we focus on more are what are the human skills that we need to be focusing on to put into practice. And one of the things that we, especially now with these things that are happening, is really looking at how you manage your environment now that you have these options. So we call this hiring your AI team and really helping people understand how it mirrors onboarding a human in your organization is very parallel to how we onboard AI tools into our organization. And so this is kind of the gap we're seeing, is that lack of intentionality. But one of the reasons we encourage people to think of this hire acronym is because you begin to understand where something should be used and where something shouldn't be used. But the idea is that you are ultimately the leader of the AI team. You have the final decision-making power. You are the one that's navigating and managing and doing all of these things. And so before looking at a tool and how we bring it in, we focus a lot more on hire stands for history. What has this AI tool done before? Where has it best been used? So for example, that use case you just shared is great if I'm a lawyer and I'm looking at okay, should I be using this? What could I use it for? Great. You just gave me a use case, kind of when we interview people, right? Oh, tell me about your past. Tell me what you've done, things like that. We're looking for evidence of success. And then after that, to again, your point, instructions, right? Once I have this AI tool, it's not enough for me to just hire somebody and bring them in. I have to onboard them. I have to give them instructions. I have to guide them in being successful in alignment to my goals, my outcomes, and things I want to be able to achieve. And that brings us to R. And I think the R is the one that we struggle with as well with humans. And that is giving people the wrong roles. Each AI tool has very different strengths. I know a lot of people are this is my favorite. That's my favorite. We are moving to a world where you're going to be working with multiple AIs. And so multiple AI tools that will just be integrated in everything. Knowing the right role for the right use case is going to be essential. And then so HIR and then E is efficiency. Did it really bring value? Is this really moving the needle for me? Am I getting closer to my goals? Am I being able to do more of that impact dream work that I had first initially wished I could do? And if you are, then you have a good scenario going. If the HIRE are not aligning for you, maybe that's not the best fit for your organization, the best use for what you're doing. And so I think this alignment is something that is really, really, really important for people. how we communicate that alignment to the rest of our teams in our organization to just, allow for it. And a lot of people like to talk about AI ethics, but it's just such a vague word that we need to get more granular about in terms of what we mean. And I think decision making with integrity and having actual criteria inside your organization for what that means, what your values are, how you want to make decisions, where you want things to be used is to me like a really, really, really big part of like the human side of the ethics that's involved with using these AI tools.
Absolutely. And I think the reframe that I use is it's not ethical AI. It's that I am an ethical person, or we are an ethical organization that's adopting AI. AI is in service to our values. AI is not defining our values.
Yeah. I think it's really easy to like want to go to your AI tool first and get caught up in a lot of like, flashy things and whatnot. But I think especially like, a lot of our work is with schools. And so I think especially when we like are working with kids, really helping them make these decisions, which brings us back to why we were talking about cell phone bans, right? And like social media, like issues and things like that. We don't teach people how to adapt and how to make decisions about and even just that self-awareness of how is this impacting me? What is this? What decision should I make? What ripple effect could that decision have, right? You might just think it's fun to make a photo of something, of another person and put this outfit on them or just face swap or something like that. But what are the implications of that decision? Beyond just like you thinking maybe this was something funny to do. We don't give kids, I think, the time and space to think through those things in a way where they get guidance from adults to be able to then make better choices and be more aware about what's happening around them.
You bring up a great point. And so many people who are listening to this podcast are parents. And if they're not parents, they're certainly leaders within organizations. And thus, I like to think stewards of those whom they manage. So in this case, if I'm someone who has responsibility over others, I have two choices. I can take away the cell phone, I can take away AI, or I can teach responsible online behavior. I can teach responsible social media usage, and I can teach responsible AI usage. I think you and I are both in that latter camp, right? Yeah. How do we teach responsible usage? So in that respect, what would you share with folks as best practices, whether I'm an organization who wants to adopt AI or just I simply want to prepare my child?
I don't want to dismiss how difficult the scenario is, right? I always say we've left a problem to rot for the last 20 years, and now we want to get up and fix it overnight. And it just doesn't work that way. And so I think the first step is acknowledging the situation we're in and acknowledging that we have not made progress on this for the last 20 years. And I think what that does is it really makes you wonder why. Like, why have we not had this figured out when we've had 20 years to do so? I think it's a mix of lack of foresight and not having an immediate impact. I think that's the one reason why ChatGPT feels different and is triggering a different response compared to other emerging technologies like Facebook or the iPhone or, the internet or anything else. ChatGPT has immediate impact on what you're doing today in the classroom, whether you're somebody who's writing an essay, whether you're somebody who's coding in a company, whether you are somebody who's trying to create a startup, or you're somebody who's trying to launch an online business. Like, it doesn't matter what area, or if you're just somebody who's looking for a recipe for dinner, right? It doesn't matter what area of your life you're in. ChatGPT has an immediate impact on creating a different experience. And it's a different experience that encroaches on things that were exclusively yours. So yes, we've had technology that you could say, oh, but I was able to take a photo. I was able to do these different things immediately, but it doesn't encroach on you and what you do, right? So for the teacher in the classroom, it being able to do the essay, that really encroaches on us. So sure, technology, I could have made a video, I could have done a screencast. Like it's always a complement. This is a replacement, whether people like that word or not, right? I think that's a really hard thing for a lot of people to say, but we're very blunt in saying, if you don't think there is a possibility that AI is going to replace some of the areas of your life, then you don't know AI. And you need to go and start experimenting more with these tools because you're also playing with them at 1 and 2 years old, right? In the last 2 years, they've grown more than most humans do in their entire lives. And I say that because of my experience with design thinking workshops, not because I don't think people are capable, which is why we really push this. We absolutely believe every single person is capable of being irreplaceable, but that not every single person has the skills and experiences to know how to put those pieces together. So I don't want to dismiss at all how fragile and segmented and just broken the situation is in dealing with it, which is why banning something seems like the obvious and easiest response. But when we don't take a step to pause and ask why, we don't give ourselves the opportunity to find those gaps, right? Like back to design thinking, like spend 55 minutes in the problem space versus, 55 minutes in the solution space, trying to just come up based on things with your assumptions. And so I think when we do that, we realize like, wow, we just didn't realize the implications. Like this is another really small one. Like even with all of this here, we're still not picking up on this. I always say people use the term cell phone and social media interchangeably, and it's not. So I don't know if you saw, but like Instagram recently expanded the number of photos you could put on a carousel from like 10 to 20. Right? And they're very blunt and transparent. Like they're not even hiding it from you. We need more data, right? Because when you upload your photos it was on the Oprah special yesterday, right? Like that mom who thinks, I'm just uploading a photo of my kid to just share because that was so funny. That is the most innocent thing. Like we all do it all the time.
Right.
But we never once thought like, oh my God, somebody's going to go take all those images of children and now turn it into some like child pornography thing with a bunch of deep fakes and do all these extra things. Like that 10 years ago wasn't even in anyone's head, right? Like these videos we make, these things we do. And so it's not to say that, so then the flip side could be like, okay, well, stop doing that. Like, no, we should have stronger regulations in place where the people doing these things are the ones punished, not the people who are trying to use things for good or to strengthen communication and things like that. So I think when you don't have that foresight from an earlier space, I love this quote. If you get people asking the wrong questions, they never have to worry about the answers. And I think because we're constantly asking the wrong questions, technology companies, governments, all these different places that are responsible for this never have to worry about the answers because no one's asking them, right? Like I always bring back The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt because I think like it's such a scam, but he's so popular because he's really hit a pain point. But the one thing you'll notice, he wants schools to do the banning. He wants parents to not give kids. He doesn't even talk about advertising and the importance of like I wish the same ban mentality he had towards cell phones was the same energy he put to advertisements that are shown to kids and these other things that are happening that are actually the root cause of the problem, not the phone itself. Because what happens to the 16-year-old who's had their phone banned, the teacher doesn't have to worry about it in class, and now all of a sudden they're a young adult having to figure out the world? Like that to me is just like so unethical that it just is not the right approach. But it's hard now when people are already busy and they have so many things going on. Now you've got AI and now you've got ChatGPT and now you've got the next evolution of everything to then be like, oh my God, we need to go 20 years back and look at all the things that need to be fixed and then deal with this.
Right.
It's a really overwhelming task.
It's interesting if you think about something else that children are introduced to outside of their parents, and that's drinking, right? The drinking age is 21 and most students are at college. And I'm not naive, but right, most of that drinking doesn't start until they get to college, even if they're 18, which is out from underneath their parents. And that has negative consequences. And so if you keep social media away from children while they're at home and then release them into the wild and then also drop social media on top of that, that's a dangerous precedent and can have very negative effects. And similar with AI, if we don't teach our children how to use AI in a healthy way, knowing that if they're successful in life, they will have a team of AIs to make them more efficient as they go forward. We as parents need to do that ourselves.
Yeah.
And so just in the last few minutes we have, if I'm a parent or a manager with an employee, what is that first step I can take where I introduce the technology, but yet don't feel like I'm giving up my control? How do we just broach this subject?
One of the first steps is to just like build communication with young people. I am so in awe. Like, again, go back to assumptions, right? We're doing something next week where we have like 200 13 to 18-year-old students coming together for a leadership conference, talk about AI and design thinking. And we did like a little Padlet board from before to ask them, what are some of your questions? What's on your mind? Things like that. And their questions are honestly better than any question I hear from adults. Like, they are so thoughtful. They are so intentional. They're worried about the ethics. They're worried about their jobs. They're worried about what skills they should be focusing on. They're worried about so many things. And the data tells us this as well, right? Like, they're worried about their future. They see what's unfolding. They know they're not ready. The one thing I really believe is that AI gives us an opportunity to make up for the last 20 years. There's a lot of parallels, right? From digital citizenship to healthy use of technology to self-awareness to regulation, self-regulation. So many of these elements are all similar, that we have an opportunity to kill two birds with one stone by being able to, the same conversations you're having with AI are the same ones we should have been having for the last 20 years. But okay, we can't do anything about that. The next best time is now to be really proactive about foresight, looking at not just being in awe of what it can do now, but what are the implications, positive and negative, right? We have to look at both. What are the different things that can unfold as a result? And you know what the best part is now? You don't have to do that work alone. You can literally go into, like, Perplexity is one of our favorite tools to do this with. I'm a parent and I have a 13-year-old. I want to use foresight to think about what are the top 5 things I should be thinking about and talking about with my child. And it will give you the first set of inspirational ideas to be able to be like, you might not like all of them and you don't have to like all of them, right? Like, that's you being the leader of the AI team. I like 1, I like 3, 2 sounds really strange, not going with that one, but it can also inspire other questions you might have. Before, we would have to do this work alone. I don't know. How am I going to think of this? What am I going to do? But now that you have these AI tools, we can simply partner and collaborate with them to move faster towards our outcomes.
I love it. It's using the technology to coach yourself to help others adopt and embrace that technology. And I think that's the most important lesson that we can take from this. And second to that is this idea of embracing the design thinking mindset. Diverge before we converge. Practice empathy. Practice integrative thinking. Practice optimism. Experimentation, iteration. And at the end of the day, the great results are still going to be human on human collaboration. But each of those humans at the table will have a team of AIs helping them with facets of that deliverable. And what do we do as we increase that efficiency, as we increase our tempo, whether it's the tempo of student learning, the tempo of in a classroom, progressing through a curriculum, or in professionally, the tempo of actually delivering projects in shorter amounts of time. And understanding, as you said earlier, I think the fundamental question is, if AI is going to make me 50% more efficient, am I going to get paid 50% less? Or do I take that and step up and say, how do I take on 50% more responsibilities? And I think that's the big question, which unfortunately will get shifted to our next conversation. So Sabba, you mentioned about your book. Why don't you give us a little bit of a commercial for that, and then any other closing thoughts that you might have?
The book is really all about this. It's really why design thinking is your human advantage, that we really believe makes you irreplaceable. While it looks like AI tools, and not just looks like, they can do complex problem solving, they can do all of these things. One of the number one things we always say at the end of the day, every AI needs your human spark. You have to be able to identify the problem you are trying to solve, the idea, the dream you're trying to build, the outcome you're trying to get to, the whatever it is that you are trying to design, build, or solve for. That has to come from you, and then your AI tool can do so much more after that. So the book is really about how we can begin instilling these very human skills in our young people, with a focus on those human skills and the power of building an AI team that allows educators and school leaders to actually accelerate the movement on getting there. We've talked about it for many, many, many decades. I think this is the first time every single person who's a player in that ecosystem has some support whether you are a teacher, whether you are a principal, whether you're a superintendent, every single person can lean into building their own AI team. And so that's what we're really excited to share is how you can build your AI team to be able to get better results that allow people to really be irreplaceable so that they feel like they have an identity and a place and purpose in society.
I couldn't have said it better. Thank you so much for taking the time today to talk about this. I know there'll be a vibrant discussion online as you begin to get feedback from your book as it's launched, and we'll put links in the show notes too so that folks can pre-order that. I know it's already rocketing up the Amazon link, so it's time to get on board. And Sabba, we hope to have you back here in the next few months so we talk about the next AI advancements and how we can bring that into the classroom, but also our professional lives and ultimately lift those up around us that we care about.
Oh, thanks. I always love chatting with you because your design thinking mind is so much fun.
All right. Thanks, Sabba. We'll talk soon.
Thank you.